While the Star Wars prequel trilogy is often criticized, it seems George Lucas and his team did viewers a favor by leaving one gruesome scene out of Revenge of the Sith. There are a lot of reasons why some audiences think the Star Wars prequels don't work, but perhaps the biggest is that Anakin's turn to the dark side isn't all that convincing. There's no hint of Vader at all in the young boy we see in The Phantom Menace, and the obsessive young man he turns into in Attack of the Clones doesn't resemble the legendary villain much either. However, it seems that Lucas did try to play up the tragic elements of Anakin's fall from grace by making him more cunning and likable in Revenge of the Sith. What should have been a gradual descent into villainy over the course of 3 movies is instead all packed into a single film, which means Anakin's turn feels insanely rushed. He goes from a genuinely good guy worried about the safety of his pregnant wife to somebody who commits premeditated mass murder in remarkably little time. Perhaps the most unforgettable sequence of Anakin's transition to the dark side is his often memed murder of younglings. Despite how contrived the scene can feel, the look of fear that arises in the class of young Jedi faces does pull at the heartstrings. While the final result of Anakin's massacre is largely implied rather than shown on screen, the original plan for the movie had something much more gruesome on the docket.
He said, "You've turned to the dark side, that you killed younglings."
The stunt coordinator for the film, Nick Gillard, spoke to Tatooine Times in 2020 about how the movie was originally a bit more explicit when it comes to all the child murder stuff. Gillard explained, "We went into Hayden's garage the night before we were going to shoot the scene and made it so violent. It was horribly violent. You can't see it, but Anakin stabs a little girl through her throat. It's the sort of thing that makes Anakin's appearance as a Force ghost at the end of Return of the Jedi feel a little less warm and fuzzy. While Vader does save his son's life and redeem himself by betraying Emperor Palpatine, it still feels like he has a lot more to atone for before his spirit can happily hang out with the others. In some way, we should be thankful that, in a rare moment of creative restraint, Lucas decided to cut the scene down. As Gillard explained, they initially edited the footage to appear as a hologram, but even that put Lucas off enough to cut it from the film.
If into the security recordings you go, only pain will you find.
In terms of the actual events that transpire, Revenge of the Sith may very well be the darkest entry in the entire Star Wars franchise. As to whether the film successfully achieves that dark tone, that's a bit more debatable. It's easy to make fun of how quickly Anakin spirals into evil, but the movie does deserve some credit for understanding, in this scene at least, that the implication is often scarier than the real thing. The decision to spare us the sight of murdered younglings is reminiscent of the scene in A New Hope, where Vader forces Leia to watch the destruction of her home planet, Alderaan. It's another moment that, if you dwell on it longer than the movies chose to, would seriously undercut Vader's eventual redemption. Vader sort of makes things right with Luke, sure, but how could he possibly make things right with his daughter? It's easy to imagine a version of A New Hope where the film cuts to a street-level view of Alderaan, showing us all the men, women, and children that lived there before their untimely deaths. Instead, we only see the destruction from space, so far away that the human toll isn't visible. The audience is left to imagine what the people of Alderaan were like, and to imagine the sheer extent of Leia's grief. It's a restrained storytelling choice that establishes Vader as a dangerous villain in the moment, but avoids being so disturbing that it's still lingering in our minds during Luke and Vader's final heart-to-heart. Anakin commits plenty of war crimes once he turns to the dark side, but Lucas always knew to keep the worst of them implied.